Hello, everybody.
Hello.
Hi, Dee.
Hi.
This is Empowering Democracy. I'm your host, Joe Firestone, and I'm here with my good friend, Dee Pierce,
Happy
who's
to
the
be here.
host, who's the host of Around the World with Dee and Friends. Happy to have you here, Dee.
Thank you.
Uh, okay, so uh, I guess we ought to start by sharing this out, right?
Yes.
Let's take a minute or two to do that.
Yes, you've got an active show prepared for tonight. A lot of well, you always do, but it's just so much information.
Yes, it's an amazing show, to quote somebody.
Yes.
We have an amazing show for you tonight.
Yes. Well, it's just so hard for people to well, they have to spend time looking for the different information and um basically the media's not telling people what's happening.
Yes, that is very true.
So it's up to you, Joe.
It's up to me and up to you, right?
Yes.
It's up to us both.
Yeah, trying to keep things from the public.
We have a little something for the Goldies tonight, too.
Hmm.
The Goldies among us. Okay.
Okay, just sharing here. And let me, yeah, let's share over in this area here too.
Okay, I did that also. So I think we are good now.
Yeah, still waiting for the audience to pop in. Yeah, I
Yeah.
see. Yeah.
Okay, should I put up the first piece?
Sure.
Okay. This one's by Pepe.
I love Pepe.
Yeah, me too.
He's always interesting and he has a way of words, a
Yeah.
flair.
He has a flair for words in many languages, I think.
Yeah, yes, he does. Oh, it's good to see Lan is here.
Ah, yes. Hello, Lana.
Joe, you have your glasses on.
Yes, I do have my glasses on. Not sure exactly why, but I do have my glasses. Okay, so we have it up now. Would you like to start?
Okay, wait a second. Alana says Shane went to the hospital earlier, just for your information.
Really?
Yeah, I wonder what happened.
How come?
Yeah, I'd like to know what's happening with
Oh, that's
Shane.
amazing. I hope it's not serious.
I hope not either.
Yeah, yeah, we like Shane.
Yeah, he's a very nice person.
I think so. Okay.
Okay, okay, here we go. Pepe Escobar. Let the new great game begin.
Ta-da!
Okay, Lana said he had a seizure, fainted.
He had a seizure. Oh my God.
Yeah.
Wonder what caused that.
Mm. Okay, getting back to the article. This was never meant to be Yalta, although Yalta 2.0 may eventually happen. This was never meant to be Yalta, although Yalta 2.0 may eventually happen on the Victories Day parade in Moscow next May 9th, celebrating 80 years of the end of the Great Patriotic War and the defeat of Nazi Germany. Putin as the host and Xi Jinping as a top guest will be in town. So might be Donald Trump. Why not have them all board on flight to Crimea Crimea and stage a Yalta 2.0. Where else? Yalta. Okay, quote, sweet dreams are made of this, to quote pop metaphysician, the Eurythmics.
Yes, Eurythmics indeed.
Yes. Meanwhile, we didn't have Yalta, not even Reykjavik. We had a long 4.5 hours in the royal palace of Ed Diriyah in the Wadi Hanifa Valley. Russia and the U.S. finally sat down to discuss as adults for the first time in 3 years. A delightful measure of excitement was duly provided, all related to the parties being involved in quote, work on normalizing diplomatic relations until 3 months ago under the cadaver in the White House administration and his Secretary of Genocide. That possibility was as remote as a meteorite crashing on Earth, but in a distant future. U.S. Secretary of State Marco Rubio performed the superhuman feat of at least not crashing in front of the mighty Lavrov, the top diplomat on the planet. Lavrov and Rubio agreed to create a consultation mechanism to eliminate irritants, American terminology, in U.S.-Russia relations and to cooperate on, quote, issues of common geopolitical interest. As per the State Department, BRICS might not be one of them. Eliminating, quote, irritants can be easily interpreted as code for Trump 2.0, trying to find ways out of the previous tsunami of sanctions and economic warfare that only produced spectacular blowback. The Americans predictably emphasized that, quote, one meeting is not enough to resolve the Ukrainian conflict. Of course not. Presidential advisor Yuri Yashikov noted that Putin himself will decide when, quote, contacts with the U.S. on Ukraine will begin, and who will be the Russian negotiators. Lavrov fully debunked the existence of a three-stage plan on Ukraine, including a ceasefire, elections, and the signing of a final agreement. Carefully examining the record so far, Lavrov has always maintained that the U.S. is, quote, non-agreement capable. Trump's special envoy, Steve Witkoff, was positively beaming. Quote, we couldn't have imagined a better result after this session. Well, Witkoff certainly followed the money. Trump's supreme priority when he and the American delegation were completely, quote, surprised to learn that, quote, U.S. companies lost $300 billion from leaving Russia, as revealed by the CEO of the Russian Direct Investment Fund, Kirill Dmitriev.
Right.
As with the BRICS fiasco, looks like Team Trump also has not been doing their homework on the business front. How the geopolitic war was won, or the geoeconomic war was won. Based on what happened in Riyadh, it's too early to brag that Washington under Trump 2.0 has declared that Ukraine and his puny narco Führer are over. Puny. A rump Ukraine will survive in some shape or form, but it's far from clear, quote, what will be post-war Ukraine. As for Russia, at the forefront of designing a new world order, that seems to be the case. A new great game is starting, eons away from the original British 19th century concoction, and much closer to how a new great game was perceived in the early 2010s, when the Chinese came up with the new Silk Roads concept. When we have Washington and Russia now proclaiming to, quote, consider each other's interest That automatically means the empire of chaos losing its previous leverage and now being forced to sit on the table and listen.
Right.
Lavrov
And
emphasized we actually heard each other.
yes, and the emphasis is on listen.
Yes, listen. Yes.
To listen. Okay, and Lavrov says we heard each other.
Yes,
Okay, that's a big thing for the Russians
it is.
because we were not listening to them for a very long time, and there was never any evidence that they heard us, or that we heard them, I should say.
Right. When both delegations stress that a personal Trump Putin meeting is very complicated to schedule, that can certainly be interpreted as code for how the U.S. deep state will be forced to spin what is a de facto unmitigated strategic defeat in a failed proxy war. Beyond the proverbial torrent of spin on what are Trump's real motives to get closer to Russia, generating even delightful intimidations of a hallucinatory magic carpet ride to the sound of Steppenwolf and Jefferson Airplane, as well possible this may only be a fictional ride. Or something was more sinister. Trump setting up the European rabble for a new great war against Russia before 2030 with the Americans watching from afar.
Uh-oh.
What is certain is that Trump wants to normalize Russia to stop losing money in Ukraine. Let those European patsies pay up and concentrate on the real nitty gritty, the tech and geoeconomics war with China, which Beijing in several layers has already won without launching a single HIMARS,
Hi, Morris. Yes.
HIMARS, instead concentrating on the achievements of the Made in China 2025 plan. As for the Euro patsies, which Trump positively abhors, they gathered together in Paris for a glorious counter-symmetry non-event, the League of Losers, discussing what else, their forever war, and how they are going to dispatch their peacekeeping forces that they don't have, with weapons they don't have, to Ukraine. The mutt posing as British Prime Minister is promising to put boots on the ground, while the toxic Medusa von der Leyen continues to voicerate in her rabid warmongering Chihuahua best. Even other rabid dogs, such as Poland, alongside poodles Germany, Italy, and Spain, said, quote, no to the Brit Dr. Martin's avalanche.
I'm not sure I caught the last reference there. I'm not sure I know who Dr. Martins is.
I don't know.
Okay, I know who the Medusa von der Leyen is, of
Oh,
course.
yes, we know that.
It's Ursula von der Leyen.
Yes.
And I know who the British PM is, Keir Starmer. But I don't know who the Brit Dr. Martin's avalanche, what that refers to. Anyway.
Anyway, as it stands, what happened in Riyadh was just a first step, a U.S.-Russia reconciliation of sorts, like the long detente of the late 1960s and mid-70s, Gorbachev-Reagan in 1986 to 1989, and Gorbachev-Daddy Bush 1989 to 91 that finished with the collapse of the USSR, and Medvedev and Obama in 2009 that ended with the destruction of Libya.
Oh, God.
Yeah. So, for the moment, we have zero facts, apart from what Russia forces are continuing to create, in the battlefield of Novorossiya. These new facts on the ground will make things even more dire for the Americans. As the ultra-problematic Ukraine, negotiations will stretch for at least a few months.
I'm sure he's right about that.
Yeah. Let
They
a
might
sobering
even last for 6 months.
Mhm. Let a sobering Lavrov have the last word. Quote, when national interests align, we need to do everything to unite efforts on these tracks for the sake of mutually beneficial projects, both in the geopolitical sphere and economic affairs. Lavrov is convinced that the Americans now, quote, have a better understanding of our position. Well, that be the case, or will this just be another chapter in a relentless reality show? Let the new great game really begin.
I
Yeah,
thought that was a terrific perspective on what went on in Riyadh
yes,
and how significant it is, and also what some of the difficulties are, and cautions to not be too hopeful. But it seems that everybody at that conference has agreed that for a 4.5 hour meeting, that quite a lot of communication went on
mm-hmm,
in the 4.5 hours. And since the purpose of the meeting was for both sides to communicate with one another and for both sides to get an understanding of where the other stood,
mm-hmm.
I think that seems like it was a very successful meeting. Uh, Lavrov's final comment about it, okay, was very wise.
Definitely.
It's very interesting he put it, in that way, for the sake of mutually beneficial projects. So he looks at the United States and Russia as doing projects together for the
Mm-hmm.
benefit of both. Uh, we didn't hear anything like that, from previous administrations.
No.
And it seems as though the people from the Trump administration were willing to listen to that and hopefully to take it up seriously. Okay, but we will know more. But anyway, that's the first of our perspectives on what happened in Riyadh.
Okay, and you have some comments here.
So let's take a look at the comments. Lana says, please all hit that like button. Shane said he had a seizure, fainted. Steve Wolfman said, hello, everybody. Early Lori says, hi, Steve. Steve Wolfbrand says, hi, Earl. And hi, Lana.
Yes, hello everybody.
So we have hellos. So hello, everybody.
And Friar Steve came in at 8:18.
Yes, I'm glad you're here, Friar Steve. Okay, so let's get to the second of our perspectives, and these perspectives are from two people. Uh, okay, specifically Bob Scheer. Okay, um, and most notably, actually Ray McGovern. This was an interview of Ray. It was actually a conversation between Bob Scheer and Ray McGovern. Okay, now the link is a highlighter link, but it was from an UNS review piece called Trump, the Peacemaker. The authors of it are listed, okay, as Robert Scheer, okay, and Ray McGovern. This was on February 18th, 2025. We're not going to read it or play it because it's 1 hour long, and the number of words is 8,600 words, so it's too long for that. But I will go through particular statements, okay, that were made here. Okay, so Bob and Ray have actually discussions, I think, every Wednesday or every Thursday, or something like that. And this is one of their discussions. And the title of it is Peace with Russia, question mark. And I'm going to read and comment on a transcript. I'm going to skip the historical part. There are recollections of what happened under Nixon. So I'm going to pick it up at the highlighted part. Okay, this is, this part is by Ray. Okay, it's a piece of what Ray said. It's long story short, 1987, the Treaty on Intermediate Nuclear Forces, which was even better than the SALT Treaty, the ABM Treaty, because this destroyed in place a whole class of intermediate and medium range types of missiles. They were ballistic missiles on both sides. Russia SS-20s, Pershing 2s in Europe. Okay, and it was verifiable. My friend Scott Ritter was the first American inspector on the ground at a god-awful place called Votkinsk, where he stayed for 2 years to make sure that the damn thing was verified. So all of a sudden, what happens to that? Well, Trump, in his wisdom, in 2019 gets out of that treaty. That treaty had been in place for 32 years, not just 30, okay, as the ABM treaty. So does Trump recognize the error of his ways now? Does he give less credence to the military-industrial complex and its power? Ray answers his own question. I dare say he does. Because now we have a situation where after Biden comes in and participates in causing really the Soviets or the Russians to do what they did in Ukraine, all of a sudden, after 3 years of carnage, there is a restarting, not only of interests, but of contacts. And the first point that Rubio, assisted by Mike Waltz, and Steve Witkoff, the special negotiator, in other words, the trusted person of Donald Trump, they're in Saudi Arabia today. And just 3 hours ago, they gave a little thing and they said, look, we agreed on 4 principles, unquote. Ray says, I've got it written. I made notes here. You won't find this in the major media yet, Bob, because they're trying to figure out how to report it, much less analyze it. Here it is. First, quote, we're going to reestablish diplomatic relations like we care about them. Okay. Embassies in both countries are going to be set up. We're going to undo the harm that Obama, unquote, mentioned by name did, and Biden did in reducing to a skeleton force what representation the Russians have here, and of course, reciprocally. Second, Ukraine. We're going to deal with that, and we're going to make progress. We're going to do it realistically based on the factors on the ground. 3, well, this is going to be a wider thing. We're going to do things economically. We have all kinds of potential to cooperate economically, and we're going to do that. We're going to be successful in this end. Translation? No more sanctions after a while. You heard it first. Last one, 4th. Well, we're just going to move ahead in a productive way. We're going to meet periodically. We're going to talk to each other as we have not talked to each other in 3 years, for God's sake. And we're going to go. Now, the other thing is that Rubio, when he's talking here, it's just like the old Chinese. Bob, you'll remember this well. Chairman Mao says this. And the last thing, Chairman Mao. Now Rubio is saying, quote, President Trump said this, President Trump promised this, unquote. So it's Trump that's driving all this. He's got a receptive ear on the part of Putin. And lastly, but not leastly, so to speak, I watched a 3-minute thing by Sergei Lavrov, the Russian foreign minister, who's been foreign minister for 100 years. And what he said was this, quote, look, unquote. And Ray was interrupted by Bob Scheer at this point. He said it in Russian, and you are Russian speaking, right? And McGovern said, yeah. I don't have any translation. It's just my own translation here. But I thought that, okay, I used to teach. She said, I just want to say, there aren't too many talking heads on television these days that could say, yes, I did my own translation of the Russian and so forth. Usually we don't have that kind of expertise. The fact is you've worked these issues, particularly in relation to Russia, both when it was communist and now when Putin, who won against the communist candidate and was favored by the United States after Yeltsin, which we also favored. But you're actually, people claim expertise that they're not entitled to. You know the language, you know the idiom, you follow the issues. Yet we have people right now say, quote, oh, we're being tricked, or it's no big deal, unquote, or, quote, Trump doesn't know what he's doing. You're telling me like this is like the big game changer as the opening to China was, Nixon's opening to China in the 1970s. And that the world may be ushering in an era of peace that seemed very distant just this morning before this meeting. Is that what you're saying? Ray McGovern says, yes, Bob. Now, the caveat, of course, is that the military, industrial, congressional, intelligence, media, academia, think tank, the Mickey Mat, has great power. So do the Europeans, who have a very strong industrial capability to produce weapons, and they want to reignite that. So there's many a slip between the cup and the lip, but this is very serious. This is a breakthrough, and it's the kind of thing that gives me not only enthusiasm, but hope that the specter of a nuclear exchange, which was extant just 3 months ago, for God's sake, has disappeared with respect to Ukraine and what might fall out from that. And on this language thing, just a little vignette that lights things up a little. Gorbachev, came in. Okay. Now the name is Gorbachev. That's the way you pronounce it. I won't go through the orthography. It's just that, okay? So Vice President Bush says to me, quote, Ray, you know Russian. How do we say this Gorbachev thing? I said, look, um, uh, um, say garbage. Bush says, garbage. Now just say off, off. Now say them together with the accent on the off. Gorbachev. You got it, Mr. Vice President, quote unquote. And he did get it okay. And you're looking at speeches. Gorbachev. Okay. Now that's a small thing, but take Lavrov. Lavrov is the way you say it. The foreign minister, what's his name? The guy who was our Secretary of State, Tony Blinken, never was able to get that. And here he is trying to conduct. But anyhow, there are niceties that mean a lot to the Russians, like being able to pronounce their name right. Bush got it right. Reagan tried. He got it sort of right. Anyhow, it does help to know Russian. This is what Lavrov said just 2 hours ago. His came after the first one. Quote, look, the way we started out here, unquote, says Lavrov, is that Rubio, Secretary Rubio said, quote, we have our own national interests, and our national interests sometimes coincide with your national interests, but sometimes they don't. And so we're about trying to figure out how to manage when they don't coincide, unquote. Now, this is the first start when we've agreed on these principles, 4 of which I mentioned before, and Lavrov says, quote, our discussions were, speaking Russian, very Russian, and he said the Russian word for useful. Ray goes on, this is big to say this. It wasn't a common communique, but here is Lavrov saying this. He says, quote, we're looking for a full expansion, not only of our diplomatic facilities, but in discussions about different parts of the world, and we're really interested in the economic opportunities here, unquote. So again, read sanctions, which I believe will be disappearing very soon. Quote, the best thing is that we stay in touch with each other, unquote. And I think that's where it sort of peters out. It's only 3 minutes, but that's a big deal. Lavrov coming out and saying precisely what Rubio said in 10 minutes. Rubio with Waltz and a Witkoff. But it's the same deal. They're exuberant, they're exuberant about moving. By the way, I should mention that Rubio and Waltz were careful to say, quote, now everybody's going to have to approve this to make this sustainable. We'll have to get Ukraine to approve, and of course, it'll be necessary for Russia to approve. So, we're all aware of that. We're going to talk with our European partners, but the horse has left the barn, okay? The European parties know now they don't stand for much. Now, after this scheme. Okay, now I'm going to skip a part of it. It's an important part. If you click the link on this, it's important to read this. But in the interest of time, I'm skipping. So Robert Scheer later said, what I'm getting at is, are they going to be an obstacle to this? I know you. I saw this clip with the Germans at uh, 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 the German uh, uh, at the Munich meeting. That was at just about the same time. There was a Munich security conference that was going on. It was a NATO conference. Okay, so the German at that conference was crying. And was he crying because this new Cold War might be aborted? But you know what's going on. Why is Europe interested in continuing a war that's killing so many, so many of the Europeans? Ray McGovern replies, because the German and other European elite are hacks. They are supported by the same kind of military-industrial complex that many of our political hacks are. Okay, I think uh, 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 Max, uh, what Ray is doing here is calling to the producer. Do you have that little clip? It's about a half minute here, but it speaks volumes because the head of the Munich conference tried to end up things. There he is beginning to weep, and Mark, especially when he says, quote, now let me conclude, and this becomes difficult, unquote, and he can't conclude. Well, watch the clip, please. It's only 49 seconds, so if you fall asleep, you'll miss it. Head of the Munich Security Conference. Let me conclude that this becomes difficult. It is clear that our rules-based international order is under pressure. It is my strong belief that this more multipolar world needs to be based on a single set of norms and principles, on the UN Charter and the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. This order is easy to disrupt, it's easy to destroy, but it's much harder to rebuild. So let us stick to these values. Let us not reinvent them, but focus on strengthening their consistent application. Let me conclude, and this becomes difficult. And Ray McGovern says, so let's all clap. I think the reason why Ray thought this was so significant was because before the establishment of the rule-based international order by the United States, international relations in the world was guided to some degree by the UN Charter and the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. And the rules-based order of the United States was departing from that all over the place. And the U.S. was making the rules up, as it went along. And the rules were for everybody else, and not for the United States. That was apparent, to everybody. So it was a big thing that the head of the, of the Munich Security Conference made reference to the UN Charter and the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, and said that the multipolar world needs to be based on those norms, and principles. And I have to add here that that's what the Russians and the Chinese keep going back to, and what they keep on saying. They're the ones who've been defending the UN and the Charter and the Universal Declaration of Human Rights in recent years. Whereas the United States and its allies, have been doing what they want without reference to the Charter and the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. So let me skip some more of this and go on to the next highlighted matter. What they're talking about, is Israel, and Netanyahu, Palestine, and Trump, and the peace initiative in relation to Gaza, and Israel will stick. By that, it's not a reference to the Gaza plan of Trump, but rather to the ceasefire. So, taking that into account, quote, but the fact of the matter is, this president, as they say, most of the people I know just dislike him every which way and fear him and talk about fascism and everything. By the way, who's saying this now is Bob Scheer. Yes, it's Bob Scheer. But the fact of the matter is, this president, and as they say, most of the people I know just dislike him every which way and fear him and talk about fascism and everything. Well, peacemaking, it's something we're all supposed to respect. And so we're in for a weird period now. I mean, there are plenty of Republicans who support the wars, and so forth. Uh, uh, And are we really, I'll draw on your expertise here. Are we witnessing this totally unexpected historical moment where the guy who is supposed to be threatening all our sanity and decency, and he is in many ways, and nonetheless is bringing peace, at least to a large part of the world, and the most dangerous point, of course, of nuclear war fighting? Is that happening? And Ray McGovern says, well, let me go out on a limb and say, yes, that's happening. Again, there are forces that will try to prevent this, but Trump has not only initiative, but he's moved about 56 times faster than anyone ever had moved in the past. Talking with Putin on the 12th, sending our defense secretary to say those bitter things about no Ukraine in NATO, quote unquote. For God's sakes, finally on the 13th, sending Vance to talk about Europe not implementing the moral values that we all share, not letting other parties into the conference, just not really measuring up. As a matter of fact, doing things that remind Vance of the Soviet Union, for God's sake. All right, and then the next day. The next day, Rubio and Lavrov talk. And that sets this whole thing up. They said, quote, look, we have to repair our diplomatic relations. We have the people, we have our establishments, and we have to talk. And that set up this under referring to Trump and Putin, the meeting today in Saudi Arabia. Now, what happened right after the Munich conference? Well, the Europeans didn't know what to do. And as most of the bureaucracies operate, when you don't know what to do, you hold a meeting, right? So they held a meeting. The head of France said, come to Paris and we'll all talk about this. And the head of Britain, that has no army, says, we're going to send troops too. We're happy to send troops to Ukraine, unquote. A crazy notion, the others say. Quote, no, can't do it, unquote. So there's no there's no unity on this. They're just trying to figure out what to do. So this is a major breakthrough. Says Ray. Okay, so Scheer goes on with his difficulty of understanding. What he's having difficulty understanding is the initial reaction, on the part of the Europeans. When Trump and his people seem to be trying to get peace, in that region, and the Europeans seem to be very unhappy with that. And Scheer says, why in the world would the mass media, with these respected politicians, they could say, quote, we're going to question, we're going to have our concerns, we're going to hold them accountable, verify, etc., unquote. I'm dumbfounded by the militarism that is passing as logic and reason and sanity. That if you are not making war and killing hundreds of thousands of people, you're not providing stewardship of the land and you're not furthering democracy. It's, correct me if I'm wrong, and McGovern says, no, it's great. Uh, and that conversation keeps on uh, 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 going on. Okay, and Ray says at one point, uh, in other words, what's going on with the Europeans is they are gobsmacked. They weren't prepared for this. They profiteer, okay, on all of the warmongering. They are the elite that knows what's best, and what's best is all. Scheer says yes, yes, and no, because in fact, Germany was doing, first of all, one thing. We have to be very clear because it's lost in the conversation. Putin, whatever his background, and yes, he was in the military there, Putin is somebody who opposed Gorbachev. Putin is somebody who believed communism had to end. He was a supporter. He was brought actually to Moscow by Yeltsin, who he favored. So Putin was somebody who was pro-US, was accepting of our leadership and so forth. Putin only becomes a problem where he says, quote, wait a minute, we got to get something for Russia here. Okay, we understand that, but I want to go to the heart of your question. Why do these people who claim to be enlightened, liberal, so forth people not see that war is a bad thing? And Ray goes on, that's really what I'm trying to get at. Now, I know in Germany, the people who make those cars, they have to sell in China, for instance, Volkswagen and so forth. They don't want a war with China. I doubt it whether Elon Musk wants a war with China, even though noises are there because he's making up more than half of his Teslas there. And you could go down the line. Who's benefiting from this? Why in the world, and certainly not the Ukrainian people, why in the world would you say that the very idea of moving aggressively and at the same time everybody's agreed that this does not satisfy the concerns and needs of all the parties involved, okay? And yes, you have to look critically at it. There's room for debate. Okay, I'm sorry, that last piece was a quote actually from Bob Scheer, who keeps on pressing the issue to Ray. And McGovern says, well, Bob, you asked the usual question. Scheer says, I'm being naive, right? And Ray says, no, you asked a pointed question here. Who profits from all this? Who could possibly profit from that? Well, it's not, it's not actually naivete. It's just that it's not ordinarily inverted to when you're thinking these things. But it's the military, industrial, congressional, intelligence, media, academia, think tank complex, or the Mickey Mat, as Ray is fond of saying. And Scheer says, I got that. And I've heard you give that speech, but I'm asking you a different question. Germany was being successful without, being militaristic. This, after all, this was the country that wasn't even supposed to have an army, right? This is the country that visited the worst havoc and nightmare and murder and killing that the world had ever seen. So the idea Germany was very prosperous when it pursued a path of peace, when they were forced for peace. And in fact, they were benefiting from their trade with Russia. They built the pipelines that the U.S. was certainly aware were being blown up if we didn't author it. Cy Hirsch makes a compelling case that we did. The fact of the matter is the German economy is suffering. The reason they may get a new right-wing government is because social democracy has been considered a failure. German people are not doing well. Same thing in France. You've got a leader there who's a minority leader now, specifically Macron. They're not benefiting from the profit of war and so forth. And they're rejecting that. This guy is crying. Imagine. I mean, he could say we have to be concerned, we have to be balanced, we have to make sure the Ukrainian people are not hurt. Those are all understandable and very legitimate, necessary comments. But to cry at the possibility that you might have a negotiated agreement that ends the war and still produces stability and decency and saves lives, I just don't get it. I just don't get that video you showed. I just don't get it. And he's hugged, right, by another leader of the whole European thing, and the crowd is cheering. What are you cheering? That you want this madness of hundreds of thousands of ordinary vulnerable citizens in the Ukraine, and also the ones that are conscripted from Russia, and you're cheering that somebody says is what? A bad thing to do? McGovern says, Bob, sociopath comes to mind. These elite people don't give a rat's pahootie what happens to Ukrainians on the battlefield. That much is abundantly clear. They're political hacks that bubble to the top with the patronage of the United States of America. And when Obama in his wisdom allowed Victoria Nuland and Kerry and the rest of them to do a revolution or coup in Kyiv in February of 2014, they all said, oh yeah, do you think we can weaken Russia this way? Oh yeah, maybe we can. So that was the explanation. And here's a final thing from Scheer. Okay, so let's summarize, and then we'll end this. And of course, we can come back and talk about it as it develops. But it is, at the very least, probably the most profoundly confused moment in American politics and world politics. And you're actually saying that for all our fears, and I have a lot of fears about President Trump and his rhetoric and what he's doing domestically and what's happening with Elon Musk and so forth. Nonetheless, when Trump does something that apparently, and I can't see what the failing is here, I agree with Marco Rubio. I think I very rarely agree with what he has said over the years. He seems to want to reclaim Cuba and so forth, started war, and a lot of these Republicans were clapping over everything Netanyahu said when he came there and all that. But nonetheless, we're at a moment where, and this goes to your Trump derangement syndrome, it was the same moment. I want to conclude this by what I began with at the beginning. It was very difficult for people to accept the idea that Richard Nixon might be doing the enlightened thing. I found it very clearly. I found it hard to accept. Yeah, and that's similar to what is going on right now. Let's see if there's anything else to highlight here. If not, I'm finished with this perspective, but it's a very valuable one. Okay, Ray McGovern later said, who was the author who said, quote, the problem is not what Americans know, it's what they know that ain't so, unquote. This is the key here. Most Americans have been brainwashed, and I use that term, an extreme term, advisedly. She says, so you come from 27 years in an agency that did its fair share of brainwashing. Ray says, that's a different kind. What we have now is a mass media that has brainwashed everybody into thinking that, number one, the Russians were single-handedly responsible for Hillary Clinton losing the election in 2016, okay, and putting the hated Trump in office, okay. There are Americans who believe the Russians hacked into the DNC emails and used those so that Hillary Clinton would be discredited. Of course, they were very discrediting, but that never happened. And we have court testimony disproving that under oath. So these Americans are conditioned, okay? They're conditioned to believe Putin is evil and the Russians are trying to take over not only Ukraine, mind you, but Poland and the Baltic and God knows what else. Now, but no American knows that. Guess what, folks? The Russians did stop. When did they stop? They stopped in March, April 2022, 6 weeks after they started. So what do you mean, McGovern? Nobody knows that Putin and his negotiators meeting with the Ukrainians came to a deal in Istanbul, where Ukraine would forswear any membership in NATO. there'd be a ceasefire. There would be a deal where those Russian-speaking provinces in Ukraine would remain in Ukraine. And who put the kibosh on that but the U.S. and the UK? So all I'm saying here is that once Americans can learn that they've been sold a bill of goods a bit, they can learn Rachel Maddow is not the person to execute truth on Russia. Okay, there's some more here and some more highlighted, but I really have run out of time. I'm sure you're getting the perspective, by now. And that wasn't the third perspective that we wanted to present. So I'm going to give this to Dee now to go over the third perspective, which is represented in a shorter blog,
Okay.
which is from Larry Johnson. And I'll share that now for you, Dee.
Okay. And here we go. Ukraine's Zelensky forgets the first rule of crisis management. If you're in a hole, stop digging.
Okay, this is a tweet from Trump.
Okay. Think of it, a modestly successful comedian, Volodymyr Zelensky, talked the United States of America into spending $350 billion to go into a war that couldn't be won, that never had to start, but a war that he, without the U.S. and, quote, Trump, will never be able to settle. The United States has spent $200 billion more than Europe, and Europe's money is guaranteed, while the United States will get nothing back. Why didn't sleepy Joe Biden demand equalization in that this war is far more important to Europe than it is to us? We have a big, beautiful ocean as separation. On top of this, Zelensky admits that half of the money we sent him is, quote, missing. He refuses to have elections. It is very low in Ukrainian polls. And the only thing he was good at was playing Biden, quote, little like a fiddle. A, a dictator without elections. Zelensky better move fast or he is not going to have a country left. In the meantime, we are successfully negotiating an end to the war with Russia, something all admit only Trump and the Trump administration can do. Biden never tried. Europe has failed to bring peace, and Zelensky probably wants to keep the, quote, gravy train going. I love Ukraine, but Zelensky has done a terrible job. His country is shattered, and millions have unnecessarily died, and so it continues. Well, this was the U.S.'s
Yep.
war.
Yes,
I
it
mean,
was. Okay. Okay. It's not that the U.S. Uh, or Ukraine actually started the war. Obviously, it was the Russians who invaded. But that invasion by the Russians was clearly provoked since 2014 and even before by the Ukrainians and by the United States.
right, because Zelensky himself, what he ran on, was a good relationship with Russia when he wanted, when he was getting into office.
Oh, yes, he did. He ran on peace, okay, with Russia. But after he got in, he continued to build up the Ukrainian armed forces, and he continued to attack, the Russian part, okay, of Ukraine, the culturally Russian part, okay, of Ukraine, okay, and between he, okay, and his predecessors and their shelling, they killed uh, uh, 14,000 of the Ukrainians who culturally, were Russian. Okay, please keep going with the
Yeah, I
article.
was going to say too with Zelensky, when he got into office too, he saw he really didn't have the power. He saw that there was that whole that whole Nazi group, the right wing. There was just power there already. He didn't really have as much power as he thought he was going to have.
Yeah, that's right. In other words, he had the neo Nazis surrounding him, and they were threatening to kill him if he made a deal.
Right. Okay, I gotta confess, I did not see this coming. Yes, I believed that Ukraine's Vladimir Zelensky was miffed at not getting an invite to Saudi Arabia or to be part of the negotiating team. But it never entered my mind that he would kill himself in public. Suicide ain't a good look. Zelensky reacted to Trump's post by going after the Donald. Not a smart move. Well,
Yeah, I think Larry Johnson has that right.
yes. While Zelensky did not put a loaded gun to his head and press the trigger, that may have been a better option than what he did, i.e., verbally attacking and insult Donald Trump. If Trump truly was king of the realm, Zelensky would have arrived hogtied before Trump, and the Donald would have cut his tongue out. Such were the pleasantries in the Middle Ages. Okay. Here are a couple of Zelensky's verbal tirades today criticizing Trump for excluding the Z-Man from the negotiations. Zelensky said Ukraine, quote, did not know anything about the meeting between Putin and Trump and said his country will not accept a peace deal brokered without Ukrainian participation. Zelensky told reporters he, quote, would like Trump's team to be more truthful about the war and accused the president of living in a Russian made disinformation space. If Zelensky thinks that public criticism of Trump is a winning strategy to win over the Donald, he has not paid attention to Trump's methods of handling critics and opponents during the past 10 years. While Zelensky enjoys the full support of the Washington neocons and those politicians who have been paid under the table by Ukraine, picking a fight with Trump guarantees that further aid to Ukraine is DOA, dead on arrival. Trump has the memory of an elephant. He has not forgotten the role that Zelensky played in Trump's first impeachment drama. Zelensky could have spoken out in defense of Trump at the time, but he chose to remain silent. Zelensky did not buy himself any good karma with Trump. Then there is the matter of missing billions of, well, let's say public money, well, the US money. Elon Musk, as well as some folks outside of Doge, are auditing the more than 300 billion sent to Ukraine. I know from a close friend that 50 billion already has been tracked to bank accounts in the Caribbean. Sometime within the next month or two, the world will learn some specifics of Zelensky's theft of some of these funds. When that happens, Zelensky is burnt toast. Don't be surprised in a few months when Attorney General Pam Bondi announces criminal indictment against Zelensky for theft of U.S. government property, assuming that Zelensky is not assassinated or jailed by disgruntled Ukrainian military officers. His chances of finding a safe haven outside of Ukraine will dim dramatically. Zelensky fails to understand that he is nothing more than a pawn in a Western led game of global chess. He ain't essential, he's expendable. It appears that Trump's goal is in reviving relations with Russia has little to do with Ukraine and its future. As a result of Tuesday's meeting in Saudi Arabia between the U.S. and Russian delegations, there was an agreement on forming 6 working groups that will address the following issues.
Okay, before we get into the issues, note that this was not mentioned in the other perspective. These details, okay, are very important because they show that the two sides are very ambitious in developing, their relations together. Please go ahead, Dee.
Number 1, group group on strategic security and arms control. Arms control is one of the topics where dialogue between Moscow and Washington continues, even in the crisis. The New START treaty expires in 2026, and the United States is interested in extending it, but will try to impose new restrictions on Russian hypersonic weapons and tactical nuclear forces. Russia, in turn, will seek a revision of the balance of power, taking into account NATO's non expansion, and demand restrictions on the deployment of new missile systems in Europe. Number two, group on the review of the global security architecture. The issues of global security architecture, delimitation of spheres of influence, including possible mechanisms for monitoring developments in artificial intelligence, cybersecurity, and autonomous combat systems, will be discussed separately. It is likely that this is the area where the contradiction will be most acute. Moreover, other significant powers, including China, will need to be involved in the process. Group on bilateral diplomatic interaction. Both sides are interested in the return of the embassies to full operation within the framework of which mutual restrictions on the work of diplomatic missions will be lifted, and broad channels of communication will be established, including, in part, issues of economic ties. Energy and Sanctions Group. Russia is interested in lifting American sanctions, and the Americans will be offered some joint economic projects. However, the American side will try to link any concessions with demands concerning other areas, including Russian Chinese relations, so a compromise will not be easy. Plus, Trump will be wary of accusations from hawks among the Republicans about, quote, the excessive easing of the sanctions regime. Group for the settlement of the conflict in Ukraine. Within its framework, the parameters of a peace agreement on Ukraine will be agreed upon. There is already agreement on a number of issues. Ukraine is a non aligned state. The EU will not be an actor influencing the negotiations. Elections will be held in Ukraine, and then a full fledged agreement will be concluded, which will be adopted by the UN. There will be no NATO troops on the territory of Ukraine. Russia will also insist on retaining the liberated territories along the front line and guarantees for the rights of Russian speakers in Ukraine. The full scope of the concessions that Washington is ready to make and their price are still unclear. Number six, International Affairs Group, Middle East Arctic. The situation in the Middle East requires coordination of efforts by major players, including to prevent the Israeli Palestinian truce from collapsing, to make a decision on the Syrian case, and others. Russia continues to actively interact with Turkey, Iran, and the Persian Gulf countries, which makes it an important participant in any negotiation process in the region. Also on the agenda are issues of cooperation in the Arctic, where Russia maintains strategic superiority. Ending the war in Ukraine is not necessarily a top priority. Trump's team has made it clear that this is a problem for the Europeans and the Ukrainians to resolve if they are intent on continuing the war. Trump is looking at a bigger picture, and keeping Zelensky happy is not part of that vision. And here I discussed this today with Danny Davis.
Okay, of course, we don't have time to play this video.
Yes, and I got a skadoodle.
Okay, and you got a skadoodle also, but before you skadoodle, these areas, okay, discussed here are very, very important because they show how broadly both the United States and Russia, are looking at that. That's what is so helpful,
hmm
hopeful, I should say, because they're really looking to resolve conflicts.
Yes, they are.
And that's what we need to get out of the risk of, of a nuclear war.
Mm-hmm.
And the settlement in Ukraine, while very important, for Ukraine, is almost an incidental thing. Okay, it's not as important as the whole big picture.
Right, the world picture.
Right. And this is always the kind of negotiation the Russians were looking for, even before the Ukraine war. They wanted to get together with the United States to negotiate uh, something like this.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, but Joe Biden was opposed to it. Okay, and he would never get into if he had agreed to get into it. Uh, the Ukraine war would never have occurred.
Mm-hmm.
Would never have occurred. And there was no reason why he and his people couldn't have done something like this if they were interested in making peace with Russia. But the truth is, they weren't. They were interested in weakening Russia, breaking up the Federation in order for American business to loot Russia.
Right, and the looting of Ukraine, because how many times did what's his name? Um, Lindsey Graham kept saying, "We're not leaving Ukraine. We're not leaving." And he talked about the resources in Ukraine that we're not leaving.
Yes, absolutely. Okay,
Okay.
Dee, I guess you have to get over there. I'll be over as quickly as I can. I won't be spending a lot of time on the politics of gold, but I'll
Uh,
be spending just a little on that and on the comments.
all righty. See you later.
Okay, see you later. Thanks. Okay, so let me get to the comments here. Got a whole bunch from Friar Steve as usual. Evelina has got some comments also. Uh, Ex-Marine Burletic. Yeah, Brian Burletic. He's great. Great guy. Oh, wow. Lots of comments here now. Trump got rid of the treaty for Putin. This helped Russia develop mid-range nuclear weapons without scrutiny. Then he comes back in power and tries to dismantle our nuclear program. Trump makes America weak. He's following instructions that solely benefit to the Kremlin. Well, that's one guy's opinion for our Steve. Yours. Steve Wolfbrand says, I met Robert at Occupy LA. Steve Wolfbrand says that. Only Russia threatens nuclear weapons. Even said it right here. The United States has been implicitly threatening to use nuclear weapons for years and years. Friar Steve, what was it about when the United States changed its policy? Its policy used to be it would never use nuclear weapons first. That was an official policy of the United States. That policy was changed. If I'm not mistaken, it was actually changed by Trump. And that represented a change that was noticed by Russia. It was very, very significant to them. Farsi says, Putin will 100% attack Europe. Trump is only letting him reload and refit his units. Why wouldn't we lift sanctions off Russia? Why would we lift sanctions off Russia? Not national security interest of the U.S. to do that. It is. It's in a national security interest because it's one of the elements of bringing peace, to the two sides. And Putin is not going to attack Europe. He has no wish to rule Europe. What he wishes is to develop the riches and the resources, of Asia, of the Asian part, of Russia, all those areas, that whole new world there. He's interested in developing that because that's where the possibilities are. With Europe, he's interested in peace and he's interested in some trade, and that's it. But we'll find out who's right because it looks like Trump is going to make peace. And then I think you will see that Russia is not going to attack Europe, at all. Uh, And for us, I hope there are protests over trying to get rid of sanctions on Russia. I will be leading that charge in my area as a U.S. veteran. I would happily shoot any Kremlin asset if they set foot in the U.S. Russia's our enemy for life. No MAGA president view. It is my duty to ensure no such alliance ever happens in my country. EU are our allies, not the Russians. If we have a civil war in this country, this is what it will be over. Doc, under Trump, it sounds like Putin's now making the rules. Evelina says, ex-Marine Brian Berletic, I've mentioned him before, suggests that Trump's plan regarding Russia is continuity, much like Gaza plan. Doc, don't keep calling Trump peacemaker when he wants to genocide Gaza. I don't think he's going to genocide Gaza. I know he said that, but there's a new proposal on the table from the Arab nations, and I think Trump in the end is going to support that. I do. I've allowed Russian propaganda to make you think Trump is a good guy. I don't think Trump is a good guy. Whoever said Trump was a good guy? He's not a good guy because he wants peace. He wants peace so he can do business and get richer. He wants peace so he doesn't have to worry about, getting killed in a nuclear war. He wants peace for very rational reasons, even though, he is not a rational person. But I don't say he's a good guy. I'm completely opposed to what he's doing here domestically. You know that. The Europeans know exactly what to do. They're going to fight without the Putin. 2 million troops, in NATO. Frosty says NATO is a unified force. NATO will be fine without Trump. The moment he's gone, we will join NATO again. I hope not. Trump did not bring peace to Afghanistan. He just empowered, the Taliban. We should have seen this coming. He will do worse for Europe. If you think about it, the only difference with Biden is Trump sitting down to talk. Not much else. Like Biden, Trump does not want U.S. troops in Ukraine or NATO, but he's telling the Europeans to each send their armies, just not as a NATO force. Frosty says, who's profiteering is Russian oligarchs. They cannot stop the war. Their country can no longer, without the war machine is created. When soldiers come back home, there will be massive unemployment. That's what people said when the soldiers came back home from the Second World War here. Lots of people said there was going to be massive unemployment. Guess what? There wasn't massive unemployment. There was a freeing up of resources which had been devoted to war. There was spending by the government that brought prosperity to the United States. The next 15 years were the most prosperous the United States has ever had. Evelina Pont said he's not prohibiting the Europeans from going to Ukraine. Elon is moving his manufacturing to India. Wow, Doc, a coup is the opposite of a revolution. A revolutionary coup is an oxymoron. Trump wants elections in Ukraine, because democracy, but the truth is he sees it as an opportunity to put in a man friendly to U.S. And Friar Steve says, Euromaidan was about joining EU. Their president was a puppet of the Kremlin, and he signed a deal with Putin. He wasn't a puppet of the Kremlin. He was someone trying to walk a fine line between the West and the East, because he knew the independence of Ukraine depended on their walking a fine line. What happened was he made a deal with the Kremlin because the West was pushing him too hard to come over too much to the West. The only ones that put out that narrative are Russian apologists and pro-Russian Kremlin-trained journalists, especially off of RT. Evelina says, a man he likes, Russia did not stop. Doc, we're putting the pro-Russian we're getting the pro-Russian criminal apologist perspective. Only the Kremlin says that no other sort, there's no other, not Al Jazeera, not India media, only Russian apologist. Fry Steve, you think anybody who disagrees with you is a Russian apologist. That's your problem. England did not have elections during World War II. Trump has no idea of history. We had elections during World War II. We had elections during World War II. Oh, by the way, England did have elections during World War II. England had elections in 1944. And guess what, Friar Steve? The Labour Party won in 1944. And in 1944, and Churchill, okay, was thrown out. Well, maybe that was in 1945. But World War II was still going on at the time. Churchill was thrown out. And Labor passed national health insurance in those years. It was Clement Attlee who did that. Trump has no idea of history, just what he's being told to say by the Kremlin. How are you going to listen to Trump on history? We know he does not know history, but I know history. And I can tell when Trump is at least in the ballpark with his history. That's not often true. I mean, Trump invents things along the way. None of them. What you're saying is true. 14,000 killed is also from the Russian propaganda alternative facts warehouse. No, it's not. It's from all kinds of other people who have studied the situation and know very well 14,000 people were killed. It is not Russian propaganda. The only neo-Nazis when President Zelensky came to office with Azov, a battalion. No, it wasn't in Azov. The battalion was not in Azov. There were neo-Nazis guarding the president of Ukraine at that time. There are no neo-Nazis in the Ukrainian parliament. There were very few in the Ukrainian parliament. That's quite true. But they were instrumental in the coup of 2014. The neo-Nazis and right sector people provide the muscle for that coup. Okay, there are too many comments here for me to go through. I have to go over to help what Dee says. What do you opine regarding Brian's continuity hypothesis? I don't know. I have to check that out in detail. Okay, Evelina. Evelina, I'm very familiar with Brian's work. I really like his work. I think he's terrific. There's only one truth. The Kremlin does not speak truth. And we do, I suppose. I suppose you think the Biden administration was speaking truth. Send me some links that I can research to support your 14,000 theory. I'm not going to look up the 14,000. It's common knowledge. All kinds of people know 14,000 people were killed. All kinds of people know there was a civil war there that was going on. All kinds of people know that the Ukrainian government after 2014 was oppressing the culturally Russian part, okay, of Ukraine. Oh, God. Okay, I don't have time to properly take on all of the comments from Friar Steve, who is, okay, amazingly, he's amazing in terms of how fast he can type. Okay, I will give him that. Okay, so let's take this off for now. Okay, I'm not going to cover the whole of this. This is a very, very, very long piece. I'm only going to cover the introduction. It comes from, this is called The Politics of Gold. Okay, it's by Michael Hudson, the great economist, who's trying to explain why is the price of gold skyrocketing? Why has it been increasing so fast, breaking records? And there are, a number of videos. This is a transcript. Ben Norton, who was interviewing Michael and producing the program, said, the price of gold has been skyrocketing since 2018. The price of gold has nearly tripled. This has caused a big debate around the world about why this is happening. There are, of course, several different factors, and here's a graphic showing the skyrocketing of the price of gold, which is now close to $3,000 per ounce. One of them is that central banks around the world have been buying more and more gold, especially with the threat of sanctions from the United States. 1/3 of all countries on Earth are under U.S. sanctions, including 60% of the low-income countries. All of this, is from Ben Norton. The war in Ukraine has only accelerated this as the U.S. and EU sees 300 billion euros worth of Russian assets held by Russia's central bank. This has scared many other countries' central bank, which fear they could be next to have their assets seized by the West. Gold is being seen as an alternative to dollar or to euro-denominated assets. But it's not just central banks. There's also a lot of private demand, especially as there was a lot of inflation coming out of the COVID pandemic. What's interesting is that typically gold is seen as an inflation hedge, and when inflation increases, the price of gold tends to increase. But in the past 2 years, inflation has come down, yet the price of gold has continued to skyrocket. So why is this happening? Well, today I had the privilege of being joined by the award-winning economist Michael Hudson, and he explained why the price of gold continues to rise and what the implications could be for the entire global economy and the politics of gold, because as Michael often stresses, you could not separate economics from politics. So here are a few highlights of Michael Hudson, and then we'll go straight to the interview, right? I'm just going to read the highlights here, and then I'll call it quits, for the night, because I have to go join Dee for her program. Michael Hudson says, demand for gold, as I said, has been far outstripping the supply for many, many years now. And as we're taught in Economics 101 textbook, when demand outstrips supply, prices go up. But that hasn't been happening with the gold price until just the last few months. And the question is, why hasn't it happened? Well, the obvious answer is that the gold market isn't like regular commodity markets. So the United States has sought to keep gold prices down ever since it was revalued in 1971. The aim of this is political, to keep the world viewing the U.S. dollar, meaning essentially Treasury securities, as the most secure form of their international reserves. It's secure in the sense that, unlike other countries, the United States can simply print the dollars, it can't go bankrupt. People like to say gold is an inflation hedge, but you could say that eggs are an inflation hedge or pork is an inflation hedge. The point is, the real problem is the U.S. balance of payments deficit pumping dollars into the world. You'll pay dollars to an exporter from China or Germany when there was still a German industry. And they turn the dollars over to their central bank, and the central bank would then say, quote, what are we going to do with these dollars? If we don't send them back to the United States, our currency is going to go up against the dollar, and that is going to make our exports less competitive. So we have to keep our currency, our exchange rate down, and we do that by buying Treasury securities. It has always been political, and the newspapers don't want to talk about politics. Because they talk about politics, all of a sudden people would realize the Western political and economic system cannot last in the way that it's structured now. When you talk about politics, you realize the game is over for the West. So I just wanted to give you that explanation of Michael's. That's basically the central point of the explanation. The United States is trying to keep the gold price down because we want the whole world to keep on viewing the U.S. dollar as the most secure form of international reserves. But we have a situation where the U.S. is running a balance of payments deficit. So, of course, we're sending our dollars all over the world. But if we pay dollars to an exporter, to China or Germany or Japan or anybody else, and they turn those dollars over to their central bank, the central bank then says, well, what are we going to do with these dollars? If we don't send it back to the United States, our currency is going to go up against the dollar. And they don't want to do that because then their exports are going to be less competitive. So we have to keep our currency, our exchange rate down. And we do that by buying the securities, treasury securities. That cycle, okay, of dollars is the reason why gold, okay, is now going up. Okay, because the dollar has become insecure as a store, okay, of value now, because when we do sanctions, we were basically seizing the dollars, okay, of other nations. So this is the core of the politics of gold, and that's why gold prices, okay, are going up. So I once again look at your comments. No, Doc, there's no neo-Nazis regarding the Jewish president. Doc, you have to research independent journalist. RT is not independent journalism. Right now, at this very time, RT is more independent than the Washington Post. I'm sorry to have to say it, okay, but it's the truth. Doc, I've looked it up. Okay, it does exist. What does exist? I will also send you information about the Egyptian lawmaker. I do independent resource, Doc. I know you do. Feisty says, good times. Ben Norton, also RT. I look forward to having an article that we discuss that's not from, okay, an RT pundit. Okay, so RT's controlling the whole world. All these guys are under the thumb, okay, of RT because RT pays them a pittance for articles, right? For us, Steve. On that note, I'm going to say goodnight, everybody, and I'm going to go over to D's. So what you want to do is to go over to Around the World with Dee and Friends, and that's where she is, and I'm joining her now. Thank you very much.